Everyone waited for this ending. Years of theories, rewatches, and emotional investment led to one final promise that Stranger Things Season 5 Volume 2 would deliver the perfect goodbye. Fans expected tears, shock, closure, and something unforgettable. But when the final moments played out, something felt missing. Instead of feeling complete, many viewers felt empty. The biggest question became impossible to ignore. How did a show this powerful lose its magic at the very end? For years, Stranger Things was more than just a show. It was a cultural moment. Every season raised the bar higher, and every delay made fans believe something massive was coming. Season 5 Volume 2 wasn't just another release, it was promised as the grand finale that would tie everything together. People waited years, rewatched old seasons, analyzed clues, and built theories that filled the internet. The expectation wasn't just high. It was almost impossible to meet. The problem began long before the final episodes even aired. The marketing created the idea that this ending would change television history. Trailers were dramatic, interviews were emotional, and the creators talked about how everything connects. That kind of build-up creates pressure. When audiences are told they're about to witness something legendary, they expect something unforgettable. But instead of delivering a powerful emotional payoff, the story often felt like it was trying to live up to its own hype rather than focusing on honest storytelling. Another issue was time. The long gap between seasons caused fans to create their own versions of how the story should end. People became attached to their theories, their imagined endings, and their personal expectations. When the real story didn't match those ideas, disappointment was almost guaranteed. The longer the wait, the higher the expectations climbed and the harder it became to satisfy everyone. The show also leaned too heavily on its legacy. Instead of letting the story naturally move forward, it kept reminding viewers of how iconic it once was. Flashbacks, callbacks, and emotional echoes of earlier seasons were everywhere. While nostalgia can be powerful, using too much of it made the story feel stuck in the past instead of pushing forward into something new. In the end, Season 5 Volume 2 didn't fail because it was bad television. It struggled because it carried the weight of too many promises. When a show becomes a global phenomenon, the ending has to feel earned, not just dramatic. And for many fans, the finale felt more like a reminder of what Stranger Things used to be rather than a celebration of what it became. One of the biggest problems with the final episodes was how emotion was handled. Earlier seasons of the show were praised for natural emotional moments that grew slowly and hit hard. In Season 5 Volume 2, many of those moments felt rushed or manufactured. Instead of letting scenes breathe, emotions were often pushed onto the audience through music, slow-motion shots, and dramatic speeches. Characters who once felt deeply human began to feel like symbols instead of people. Their reactions didn't always match what they had been through, and some emotional moments appeared without enough build-up. This made it harder for viewers to connect in a real way. Tears were expected, but not always earned. There were moments that should have broken hearts, yet they passed too quickly. Big decisions were made without showing the inner struggle behind them. Relationships that took seasons to build were resolved in minutes. The emotional weight was there on paper, but the execution lacked patience. Instead of letting silence speak, the story rushed ahead. Another issue was how emotions were spread across too many characters. With so many storylines happening at once, none of them had enough space to fully land. Viewers were constantly jumping from one emotional beat to another, never staying long enough to feel the impact. This made the experience feel rushed and overwhelming rather than deep and meaningful. The result was an emotional disconnect. Fans understood what the show wanted them to feel, but they didn't always feel it. And in a series built on heart, friendship, and emotional growth, that disconnect hurt the most. As the final chapters unfolded, the story began to feel scattered. Too many plot lines competed for attention, and not all of them received proper closure. Instead of one clear emotional path, the narrative jumped between moments, locations, and conflicts without giving any single thread enough time to breathe. Earlier seasons thrived on simple but powerful storytelling. a small group, a clear threat, and a focused journey. In Season 5, Volume 2, the story became crowded. New ideas were introduced late, while older storylines were wrapped up too quickly. This imbalance made the pacing feel uneven, with long stretches of build-up followed by rushed conclusions. Some character arcs felt unfinished, while others were resolved in ways that felt too easy. Conflicts that were built up over years were solved in moments, removing the sense of struggle that once defined the show. When challenges don't feel difficult, victories lose their meaning. There was also a sense that the story was afraid to take risks. Instead of making bold choices that could change everything, the narrative often played it safe. The result was a finale that felt careful instead of courageous. Fans didn't want safety, they wanted impact. The emotional weight of the story became diluted because the focus was spread too thin. Instead of one powerful ending, viewers were given many smaller moments that never fully landed. The story didn't fail because of bad ideas, but because it tried to do too much at once. The final moments of a story matter more than anything else. They are what people remember long after the screen fades to black. Unfortunately, the ending of Season 5 Volume 2 didn't deliver the sense of closure fans were waiting for. Instead of feeling final, the ending felt uncertain. Some storylines were left open, others were wrapped up too neatly, and a few seemed to disappear completely. It left viewers questioning whether this was truly the end or just another pause. For a show that promised a definitive conclusion, that uncertainty felt disappointing. The emotional payoff didn't match the journey. After years of tension, fear, loss, and growth, fans expected an ending that honored everything the characters had been through. Instead, the finale felt more like a soft goodbye than a powerful farewell. What hurt most was the feeling that the show didn't fully trust its own story. Rather than committing to bold choices, it played it safe. And in doing so, it lost the chance to leave a lasting mark on television history. In the end, Stranger Things Season 5 Volume 2 wasn't a failure because it was bad. It failed because it didn't live up to what it promised to be. And for a story that once defined a generation, that's the hardest truth to accept. The emotional core of Stranger Things was always its greatest strength. From the very beginning, the show made viewers care deeply about its characters, their fears, their friendships, and the bonds that form through danger and loss. But in Season 5 Volume 2, that emotional connection began to weaken. Not because the characters stopped being interesting, but because the storytelling stopped giving their feelings the space they needed to breathe. Moments that should have felt heartbreaking or powerful were rushed, squeezed between plot points instead of being allowed to grow naturally. One of the biggest issues was how emotional moments were often forced instead of earned. Characters were placed into dramatic situations, but the story moved so fast that viewers barely had time to process what was happening. A goodbye that should have shattered hearts lasted only seconds. A reunion that should have felt overwhelming was reduced to a quick exchange before the story rushed ahead. These moments didn't feel unimportant, they felt unfinished. The show told the audience how to feel instead of letting emotion rise naturally through silence, expressions, and slow storytelling. Another problem was how certain character arcs lost their emotional weight. Characters who once felt deeply human began to feel like tools used to move the plot forward. Their reactions didn't always match the gravity of what they were experiencing. Fear, grief, love, and sacrifice were shown, but rarely explored. Instead of sitting with these emotions, the story constantly pushed forward, as if afraid to slow down. This made it hard for viewers to truly connect with what the characters were going through. There was also an imbalance in how emotional focus was distributed. Some characters received too much attention while others, who had been important for seasons, were pushed into the background. This made their endings feel rushed or incomplete. Viewers who had followed these characters for years expected meaningful conclusions, but many arcs ended quietly without the emotional payoff they deserved. It felt less like a farewell and more like a checklist being completed. Another major issue was how the show relied heavily on dramatic music and visual intensity to create emotion instead of letting the writing do the work. Emotional moments were often signaled rather than earned. Slow motion shots, swelling music, and dramatic camera angles tried to tell the audience how to feel, but without enough emotional buildup, those techniques lost their power. Instead of feeling moved, many viewers felt disconnected. The heart of Stranger Things was always about relationships, friendships tested by fear, loyalty in the face of danger, and the pain of growing up too fast. In Season 5, Volume 2, those themes were still present, but they were buried beneath fast-pacing and crowded storytelling. The emotional truth that once made the show special became. By the time the story reached its final moments, the emotional payoff felt smaller than it should have been. The journey had been long, but the destination felt rushed. What should have been a deeply moving farewell became a reminder that even the strongest stories can lose their emotional core when they stop giving feelings the time and space they need to fully land. The story of Stranger Things once thrived on balance. It knew how to mix mystery with emotion, fear with friendship, and chaos with heart. But in Season 5, Volume 2, that balance slowly slipped away. The narrative became crowded, stretched in, too many directions at once, and as a result, the story began to lose its focus. Instead of feeling like one powerful final chapter, it felt like several unfinished stories competing for attention. One of the biggest problems was how the plot tried to handle too many ideas at the same time. Every character seemed to be on a separate mission, dealing with a different threat, emotion, or goal. While this approach worked in earlier seasons, it no longer fit the scale of the final chapter. Instead of bringing all storylines together, the show scattered them. Scenes jumped quickly from one location to another, leaving little time to process what had just happened. Important moments passed before they could fully land. This constant movement made the story feel rushed. Even when episodes were long, length alone does not create depth. Without proper build-up, big moments lose their impact. Conflicts that should have taken time to grow were introduced and resolved too quickly. The audience barely had time to understand the danger before it was already over. As a result, tension faded instead of building. Another major issue was the lack of clear focus on a central emotional journey. Earlier seasons followed a clear path, often centered around one main emotional question: will they survive? Will they find each other? Will they make it home? In Season 5, Volume 2, that emotional through line was harder to find. The story jumped between threats without giving one clear emotional anchor. Without that anchor, the narrative felt scattered and unfocused. The pacing also suffered because the show tried to give everyone a moment. While this may sound fair, it weakened the overall impact. Some characters received screen time that didn't move the story forward, while others who deserved deeper exploration were rushed through critical moments. Instead of a powerful climax, the story felt like a series of small endings stitched together. There was also a noticeable hesitation to fully commit to consequences. Major events happened, but the long-term impact of those events was often softened or avoided. This reduced the sense of danger that once defined the series. When viewers sense that nothing truly permanent will happen, tension fades. The story begins to feel safe instead of risky. At its core, the problem wasn't a lack of ideas. It was too many ideas fighting for attention. The show tried to be emotional, epic, nostalgic, and shocking all at once. In doing so, it lost the simplicity that once made it powerful. The story no longer flowed naturally, it felt assembled rather than lived in. By the time the season reached its later moments, the weight of this scattered storytelling became clear. The narrative no longer felt like a single journey with a clear destination. Instead, it felt like multiple stories stitched together, each one pulling in a different direction. And while each piece had potential, the whole never fully came together into the powerful ending fans were hoping for. The final stretch of Stranger Things Season 5 Volume 2 was meant to be the emotional payoff for everything the series had built since the beginning. This was supposed to be the moment where every sacrifice, every loss, and every fear finally meant something. Instead, the ending felt uncertain, restrained. and strangely unfinished. Rather than delivering a powerful sense of closure, the final moments left many viewers feeling like the story stopped instead of ended. One of the biggest issues was the lack of finality. After years of build-up, the story seemed afraid to truly close its chapters. Some character arcs were wrapped up quickly, almost quietly, while others were left open with no clear resolution. This created confusion about what the story wanted to say in its final moments. A conclusion should feel deliberate, but here it often felt hesitant, as if the writers were unsure how much to commit to their own ending. The emotional weight of the finale also suffered because of this hesitation. Instead of delivering a strong emotional release, the story played things safe. Moments that should have been heartbreaking or triumphant were handled carefully, almost cautiously. The result was an ending that felt emotionally distant rather than powerful. Viewers were left waiting for a final emotional punch that never fully arrived. Another issue was how the story avoided lasting consequences. Throughout the series, danger was always present, but in the end, many outcomes fell to clean. When characters survive situations that once seemed impossible, it reduces the sense of risk that once defined the show. The feeling that anything can happen was replaced with the sense that things would always work out in the end. That shift removed much of the tension that made earlier seasons so gripping. The show also struggled to balance closure with openness. On one hand, it wanted to give fans satisfying endings. On the other, it seemed afraid to close every door completely. This resulted in an ending that felt more like a pause than a conclusion. For a story that spent years building toward its final chapter, this lack of decisiveness weakened the impact of the farewell. There was also a noticeable emotional distance in the final scenes. The characters reached the end of their journey, but the audience wasn't always invited to fully share in their emotions. The storytelling focused more on wrapping up plot threads than on allowing the characters and viewers to truly feel the weight of goodbye. What should have been deeply moving instead felt restrained out in the end. The biggest issue with the finale wasn't that it was bad, but that it played things too safely. The story had the opportunity to leave a lasting emotional scar, something unforgettable. Instead, it chose comfort over courage. For a series that once redefined modern storytelling, the final moments felt surprisingly cautious, leaving many fans wishing the show had been braver in saying goodbye. The final impact of Stranger Things Season 5 Volume 2 became clear only after the credits rolled and the conversations began. What lingered was not excitement or emotional release, but a quiet sense of disappointment mixed with confusion. For a series that once dominated pop culture, the ending did not spark the long-lasting emotional echo many expected. Instead, it left fans debating what went wrong rather than celebrating what went right. One of the biggest issues was how the ending failed to leave a lasting emotional imprint. Great finales stay with audiences long after they end. They replay in the mind, spark discussions, and become cultural reference points. This finale, however, faded quickly. Viewers didn't walk away haunted by its final moments. They walked away questioning them. That lack of emotional aftershock made the ending feel smaller than the story deserved. A major reason for this was the way the show avoided making truly irreversible choices. Over the years, Stranger Things taught viewers that actions had consequences, that danger was real, and that loss was permanent. But in its final stretch, the story seemed afraid to fully commit to that idea. By softening outcomes and avoiding bold decisions, the series reduced the emotional stakes that once made it so powerful. When consequences feel temporary, victories lose meaning. Another issue was the way nostalgia was used as a crutch instead of a tool. The show relied heavily on familiar imagery, callbacks, and emotional echoes of earlier seasons. While nostalgia can be powerful, too much of it can trap a story in its past. Instead of moving forward and redefining itself, the finale often looked backward, reminding viewers of what the show used to be rather than showing what it had become. This made the ending feel more like a tribute than a conclusion. The fan response reflected this emotional conflict. Some viewers appreciated the attempt to honor the characters and their journeys, but many felt unsatisfied. Online discussions shifted quickly from celebration to debate. Instead of talking about unforgettable moments, fans questioned choices, pacing, and missed opportunities. The conversation around the finale became less about emotion and more about analysis, which revealed how disconnected many felt from the ending. Perhaps the most disappointing aspect was that the series had all the tools to deliver a legendary conclusion. Strong characters, a devoted fan base, and years of carefully built lore were already in place. What was missing was the courage to fully commit to a bold, decisive ending. The story chose safety over risk, and in doing so, lost some of its emotional power. In the end, Stranger Things didn't fail because it lacked quality or effort. It fell short because it played things too carefully when it needed to be fearless. The legacy of the show will always include its unforgettable early seasons, but its final chapter serves as a reminder that endings matter just as much as beginnings. When a story spends years asking its audience to care deeply, it owes them an ending that dares to feel just as deeply in return.